Welcome back to another episode of the Demand Podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Bland, the co-founder of Omni Lab, and today I am joined by Silvio Perez, who is the head of performance marketing and metadata. And we've gone back and forth a little bit on LinkedIn over the past few weeks, few months, and thought he had some really great content and some awesome stuff he's doing on YouTube as well that you guys have to check out. But at any rate, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Super pumped to be here.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Well, cool. Well, I always start with this, as many podcasts do, but I think I know metadata very well. I've talked to probably your whole team between, Mark and Jason and Olivier and Gil and whatnot. But for those that don't know what metadata does, tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so we think about metadata as a demand generation platform. The way I like to talk about it is essentially we're like your one command center for everything demand gen. So from executing campaigns across channels, we connect into the client's ad channels, their CRM, their marketing automation tools, and from campaign execution to reporting to lead enrichment and also creating audiences outside of just the native capabilities, we help clients. So essentially end to end. And the way I always explain it to like my little brother is essentially we're trying to automate advertising and allow B2B marketers to generate pipeline and revenue versus just focusing on like front end, leads and cost per lead.
Now I know you've got the MetaMatch product, right? And then you've got the core platform. In terms of like percent based, do you know how many customers are actually just using like MetaMatch for like firmographic targeting versus how many are actually kind of using and doing exactly what you just said, where they're saying, hey, I don't want to go into LinkedIn, Facebook, and all these other channels. I just want to leverage metadata and get everything all in one platform. How does that kind of break down? Do most people just use MetaMatch, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I would say the majority are full functionality, meaning they are executing all their campaigns through metadata. And then, of course, I would, if I had to give you a number, I would probably say like 70-30, 70% full functionality, 30% MetaMatch.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm just curious because I get some questions about it from clients that we work with too. So they're always asking, like, hey, what's the best way to use metadata? Should we use just using the third-party data set and use that for firmographic targeting on Facebook, which is always the number one ask? Or, hey, should we think about something a little bit further? And then in terms of obviously who you guys market to, it's pretty obvious, but just to give some context for what we're going to be getting into in a second with regards to the paid media strategy, what does the target look like? Obviously, we're talking like all people marketing, or are there specific personas and folks that you guys target from a marketing perspective right now?
Yeah, for sure. So we kind of break it out into two buckets. We have the execs, so the VPs of demand gen, CMOs, execs, CROs as well. And then we have the more, tacticianers. So the performance marketing managers, the growth marketers. So we kind of split it out that way. And essentially we also layer in specific target accounts. So we'll have different tiers of accounts. So like tier accounts, tier B, tier C, and we'll use those different combinations to really get our message out to the front of the right people.
So I think what a lot of people always are talking about constantly is this idea of making sure that we're marketing to the whole buying committee, making sure we've got everyone in our window. And then you've got another sort of people that say, hey, we should really just be going after decision makers. That's it. Because those are the people ultimately that sign the check. Forget all the people that, are influencers or people actually doing the job. But how do you guys think about that? Clearly, you mentioned performance marketing managers. Those are the people that are like in there doing it, right? So it sounds like you guys are definitely trying to make sure that you've got messaging that's resonating not only with influencers and folks that are actually in there feeling the pain of building out audiences, et cetera, but also making sure that the people at the top level also are getting there. So how do you kind of balance the two between influencers and decision makers?
Yeah, we definitely go after both. We're a big believer in getting the buying committee. Now, in terms of the whole buying committee, right? Like, the CFO is going to be involved with that and these other roles. So we really try to go after like the key users. We call them like the power users, which are the campaign practitioners, and then also the exec level. Yeah. In terms of budget allocation, we don't have like a hard number of, 50% goes on VPs, 50% goes on like more practitioners. It really comes down to what does our audience size look like when we build these different audiences in the channels.
Yeah, because ultimately, for us especially, going after the entire buying committee is a very hard thing to do, right? Because as soon as you start going after every single person and saying, oh, it's the CFO, the COO, it's all of these other people, right? Then you've got to have messaging and or potentially content that's going to resonate with those folks because it's going to be a little bit different, right? Yeah. So ideally, if you're a small early stage company, you're saying, hey, let's go after the core people that are feeling the pain of our product, that are likely going to come in and convert on our website and start an opportunity. Let's get those people. If we have additional budget and or messaging that can resonate as well with the CEO and some of the other people that ultimately are going to sign it, sure, let's throw those people in there as well because we still want to be building awareness with those folks. But if we've got a tight budget, let's not waste our money on trying to just have a message go out to everyone, because then what you have is a watered down message. The content doesn't really resonate, right? And it just doesn't work.
Exactly. Yeah, and also too, when you're being a lot more specific in terms of your targeting, and you're going after the the key champions that are going to really influence and push for your product to be adopted in the org,
Yeah,
is those are the people who are going to be most likely to engage with your ads as well, right? So you can
100%.
stack more social proof as well. The CFO, they're not necessarily feeling the marketing pains, so
Yep.
by you going after them, you're definitely going to dilute your budget. Where I think it makes sense to go after those other roles that are part of the buying committee is when it comes to like deal acceleration.
Hmm.
Open opportunities, targeting those open opportunities, and then trying to open up your reach there, where it's not just based on like your core ICP job functions, but opening it up to those other functions as well, like finance, legal, etc.
That's a good thing to maybe dig into. So I mean, what does that actually look like though? So I mean, say I've got 100 opportunities in HubSpot or Salesforce right now, and we're saying we want to accelerate these sales cycles. We want to make sure that everyone in the committee, including the CFO, COO, et cetera, the people that are part of that, are getting messaging. So what does that actually look like? What are we sending in terms of messaging and content? What are we sending them that would be different, that actually allows them to potentially feel more comfortable moving forward with either metadata or another product for that matter?
In our experience, it's not as detailed in terms of like a CFO messaging versus breaking it out by specific functions.
Yeah.
The Really, we're speaking to like a universal pain point, and then ideally by getting all those members to at least see our ads, ideally we can influence them where they're like, we stay top of mind, right? So
Hmm.
when the VP of marketing brings it up to the CFO, hey, we're thinking about metadata and we have an open opportunity with them,
Hmm.
they're like, oh yeah, I've heard about that company. I saw their ad on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
So hopefully it kind of gives us that first touch point. In
Hmm.
terms of the creative itself and what does that look like, this is where you can have a lot of fun. Something that we're experimenting with is actually using our CSMs in the video ad, and the CSMs talking about their experience at metadata and like
Hmm.
kind of what clients can expect. So really just reinforcing the messaging in terms of what sales is saying, in terms of the the benefits that we provide, and then also if you can kind of give people a look into what it's going to be like working with your team, I think that's really powerful as well.
I love that. It's so critical too, because I think so often we get lost in saying, "All right, we acquired the lead, now move on. Let's not even touch it. Let's not forget about it. It's sales' job. Go figure it out. We did our job." But it's not. It doesn't end there, right? Marketing still has
Exactly.
very much a play, after
Yeah.
even the lead's created, because people are still going to be nurtured, and that goes for what you guys are awesome at doing in organic too, right? So it's not just paid advertising, but it's also the post from you, YouTube channel, Jason, Mark, etc. All you guys are connected in with all these marketing folks, and every time you post about something, metadata is popping up on that newsfeed again, same way that a paid ad would.
Exactly. And the other thing too, there's a big movement right now in terms of demand creation and demand capture, which, I'm all for and it's very important. But once you get to the point in terms of your marketing maturity, if your marketing team is sourcing more than 70% of your opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
you need to expand from there, right? You're missing out if you're just focusing on creating net new and capturing demand, right?
Agreed.
And really starting to focus on down funnel, accelerating those deals, reviving deals, as well as expanding deals as well, are all other areas that are really, I would say, like blue oceans of opportunity that teams aren't really focusing on.
Oh, agreed completely with what you said. Well, cool. Well, let's kind of change, I guess, direction just a little bit. So, what I wanted to dig into is what I was saying just before. So, if we could break down kind of the most high level version, I think what we wish you do is focus on paid advertising in specific. That's your area, your bread and butter, where you've spent all your time. So maybe we just break that down from a metadata perspective. Like, what does the paid media strategy look like? What are the goals? What are you guys trying to accomplish with paid media, et cetera?
Yeah, metadata is very unique. I've had the good fortune to work with a lot of different B2B SaaS companies.
Mm-hmm.
And with metadata specifically, we are unique in the sense of the majority of our budget, I would say about 80% is really more so demand creation. And then only 20% is capture.
Mm-hmm.
And that was more so out of necessity than luxury. So when we first started out, we didn't have the marketing budget to compete on $60 cost per clicks on Google and very
Mm-hmm.
expensive traditional capture strategies. So we kind of out of necessity had to rely on demand creation because it's a lot more cost effective in terms of the front end. Where we really need to pivot and work on, and that's kind of our key thing right now, is focusing on capturing more demand. We're doing a really good job of creating it. Let's do a better job of capturing it. So now that our team is growing, the budget is increasing, our targets of course are increasing. Now we have the luxury of being able to pay those premium click prices. So for us, it's about majority is demand creation, and only now are we really starting to, really get into capture. So specifically on the demand creation side, that looks like LinkedIn and Facebook, promoting our top performing organic content, getting that in front of our key accounts and our key ICPs. And then as far as the capture piece goes, right now that looks like retargeting. So retargeting on LinkedIn conversation ads. And then as far as capture goes, a big piece as well is LinkedIn conversation ads for prospecting. Jason does a lot there in terms of getting in front of net new prospects, offering them a gift card to get on a demo. And, we've had a ton of success with that.
Love it. What I think is very interesting is what you just said earlier, is that you focused all of your time on creating demand versus capturing it. I don't think you don't hear that often ever. So to your point,
Yeah,
you
I
guys are a
know
little
it's
bit
so
on an island
strange.
there, because I think everyone, right, is, you're looking at, that typical, early adopters, laggards, et cetera curve, right? It's all about, typically for the majority of SaaS companies, how do we find the people that are interested right now today? How do we convert them? And typically that means a combination of doing some form of lead gen or website conversion campaigns off of paid advertising, where you're sending people directly to a demo for people that maybe have heard about you or really have the pain and are ready to go. And then search. All right. Those would be sort of the two meetings from a paid perspective. Then other strategies like conversation ads, et cetera, also can be lead gen forms as well. But I think it's so interesting that you guys are now transitioning to capture channels. So, I mean, I think it'd be interesting for everyone, because everyone knows they should be creating more demand. I think we all get that, but it's not something that happens overnight either, though, right? I mean, it sounds great to let's send out ungated blog posts and add value and all this stuff. But, a lot of times you don't see those returns till months later. And it might not be, a year, but it can take some time to build up ultimately the content and then also to get it out there. So, I know you're sort of newer with metadata, but how are you thinking they're moving through that process? How do they start with creating demand versus capturing it?
A lot of the focus early on was through G2 and building reviews.
Uh-huh.
So that was a big one. So essentially for us, it was competing on having a product that actually delivers on its promise, especially in the MarTech space. There's a lot of empty promises. So I know initially early on, very early metadata, a lot of it was like review focused, building up G2 reviews. In terms of the creation of demand, essentially it was putting out really great content that we would want to read. We have the fortune of essentially being our ICP because we are marketing to other marketers. So essentially I know Mark really focused on, and Jason, creating content that was like genuinely helpful, wasn't a pitch fest, and actually solve problems. So that was a big focus in the beginning, creating a lot of organic content. And then from a paid perspective, this is when I'm always talking to companies, it doesn't take a lot of money to just get started. You can get started with as little as, let's say, $20 a day, and you can just take your top organic posts and amplify it through paid. And that's really what it was for a good while. And, as anything, over time we've kind of developed and we have more of a system in place. But even to this day, I wouldn't tell you that we have it all figured out. We're still in the process of figuring out, how long do we flight content for? How much budget do we give it? And that initial period, especially when you make the transition at first, it's almost like faith. It's very intimidating. And I talk to a lot of companies and they're kind of going from let's say a gated to an ungated model. But a big piece of it in terms of the quantitative side of things is measuring based on blended cost per opportunity. So essentially at the end of the day, if your blended cost per opportunity is going down and your total opportunity amount is going up, then that means it's working. Keep doing it, right?
I want to stop you there real quick. Blended cost of opportunity, I think that's a really good point. I agree too. But how do you define that? What is that? How do you calculate blended cost of opportunity? Is that across all channels? That includes salary, tech, the whole thing? What does that look like?
That is across all channels. So that's just marketing costs. So total ad spend and then marketing source inbound, organic, paid as well.
Yep, exactly. I think that's important because especially when you're running those types of strategies, you can't sit there and look at one single channel especially and say this came from there, especially when a lot of times you've got 99, 98% of people that aren't clicking through. So you're not getting that click even if you were using third-party attribution software to your website. So you have to acknowledge the fact that they still may be consuming and seeing that message and then coming in later in other channels. So a lot of times, I'm sure you guys see the same thing, but a lot of times we'll see, and I'm sure you guys have since you started running this, but an increase in direct conversions, increase in organic conversions. And I know you don't do a lot of search at all, but a lot of times we'll see branded keywords increasing over time as well, because people are now aware of us. They're familiar. They've read some content, they've seen something, et cetera. But on the back end of Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever your CRM is saying, they're saying, oh, this all came from, direct organic. It was word of mouth. It was SEO. you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're gonna kill campaigns very early, right? If you're not seeing that. If you're just going based on last touch,
Mhm.
you're gonna kill things that are actually having an impact, but it's just not having the direct impact in terms of like the linear attribution model of I clicked ad, I converted, right? Especially when you're doing the creating demand and going with ungated content. It's exactly that. It's people going direct. It's people, referring you through Slack communities and, kind of talking through you and like we really call about dark social.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
on the qualitative side of things, when you're making this transition, it's really all about number one, how are people finding you? So if having a form on, when they come in of how did you hear about us is huge.
Mhm.
Asking prospects as well, how did you hear about us? So getting that feedback from them is really helpful. And then I think at the end of the day, the ultimate goal for any company to say, hey, we're doing a good job of creating demand is if you are getting mentioned in sales calls. So
Mhm.
if your sales team is saying, hey, spoke with this prospect and they booked a demo and they said how much they love our content and that's why they wanted to learn more, I think that's the ultimate, parameter of success. And when you get to
Mhm.
that point and it becomes more and more regular, it's like a
Definitely.
snowball that builds on itself. And before you know it, more and more opportunities are getting sourced inbound. And you keep hearing that more frequently. Hey, we saw your content on LinkedIn and we really love what you guys are doing. And we wanted to explore this further.
That's exactly where I was going to go. So what you guys are doing right now for Gil and the team to say, hey, this is what marketing's doing is your number one saying, we're going to look at the blended cost per opportunity. And I'm sure you're looking at the overall marketing source pipeline, marketing source revenue numbers, right? Just as a marketing whole. And then you're going in and trying to figure out and say, all right, well, is this working? Is it not? If we're not driving more marketing source pipeline or marketing source revenue, then something's wrong. And then you're saying, all right, well, look at what we're doing here. If you look at some of the how did you hear about us form fills, if you look at what they're saying, I don't know if you guys use recording software, but are you taking all that data and putting that together and then passing that up? And that's what's kind of in the report. And it's not just, hey, here's what Salesforce or HubSpot says. You're like, hey, but look at this report that has all of the different attributable things. They're saying LinkedIn post, LinkedIn ad, or maybe they just said LinkedIn. It might not be that specific. Is that what you show them? And how does that conversation go?
Yeah, at this point, we don't even have to show them anything. It's kind of like they
Luxury.
know it's working. Let's just keep doing more of it.
Uh huh.
But as far as the reporting goes, we really only talk about pipeline revenue and then total demos that we need. So we have
Uh huh.
a demo amount that we have to hit. And then based on those demos, we know on average this many convert over. And then we have dedicated pipeline targets. So in terms of talking to Gil, Olivier, leadership, we're talking about pipeline and revenue and then total bookings in terms of demos.
How do you think people? I mean, you guys are in a luxury, and I know I've been staying pretty close with you guys. So you guys are in a luxury that you guys have a whole team that gets marketing all the way up to the top, right? But for teams that don't have that, they don't have someone that really gets it and understands it. How do they go about navigating that conversation in that sense? I mean, what would you say to them when you're saying, everyone's looking at LinkedIn or Google and saying, well, no, this is the channel that did this. And
Mm-hmm.
then going as far as saying, this is the campaign, this is the piece of creative. When we know that that person's seen multiple different pieces of creative, has been part of multiple different campaigns. I mean, the buyer journey clearly, I mean, I think everyone can agree there's multiple touch points if you just think about how you buy. But for those that maybe don't have that luxury like metadata, what would you say
Yep.
to them and how they navigate that conversation to try to say, hey, look, we should really navigate to creating more demand. We're already doing a great job capturing because I think that's where a lot of businesses are right now. They might have 60, 70% of their budget in search and then the rest in LinkedIn, Facebook, or some other channels. But how should they think about navigating that? What would you say to them?
It's very simple. I say run the 30-day test.
Uh-huh.
Take all of the prospects that book demos with your company over the last 30 days, send them a direct email, connect with them on LinkedIn if you can, send them a DM, and just ask them, how did you hear about us and what made you want to take a demo?
Mm-hmm.
And then compare their answers with whatever your attribution software is telling you.
I love it. I love it. No, totally. We do that all the time too internally, and it's just so interesting. You always get the mouth drop like, well, what do we do here? I mean, well, what should we believe? Well, I mean, HubSpot says this, though. I mean, this is all what all reporting is based off of. And it's like, listen, I mean, these things are a guide. It's not black and white. I mean, use the information. I mean, we'll attribute every single channel and try to understand how things are performing clearly. It would be irresponsible not to. But at the same token, you have to realize based on the different strategies and tactics you're taking in that channel, and to your point with metadata, you guys have a very pro kind of ungated. I don't think you guys have gated any type of content, which I know that you're kind of playing into all the talk that's going on LinkedIn with marketers hating gated content. But maybe that's an interesting transition. I mean, is there a future at some point for gated content of some kind for metadata, or maybe there is already some gated content that I don't know about that you guys are already running? What is your thought kind of like on the gated versus ungated? Because everyone always is trying to figure out that balance.
My thought process is if it has to be gated, then gate it in the sense of it's a newsletter. I need your email to give you content. That
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. If it's a live event, I need your email in order to give you the Zoom link or whatever, place we're having that meeting. Then I think it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
My whole take on gated versus ungated, and when I'm talking to clients, I just say run the math. If your primary goal with content is to have it be consumed, then just run the math in terms of, if you had X amount of clicks, certain percent convert into actually clicking over to read your content, right? If you just run that math, and I actually have a LinkedIn post where I kind of outline it
Mm-hmm.
all out for people, you'll see that even if, your conversion rates are lower in terms of ungated content, your cost per consumption is exponentially, cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the math is in your favor, right? If it's ungated, you're always going to be able to get more people to consume that. And
Yep.
that's not even taking into account if it's in the feed, it's even better because they don't have to click through anywhere. They can consume it right there. Also, the advantage as well of ungated and pushing things through the feed is most of these channels allow you to retarget people based on their behaviors that they took on the social media platform. So like with LinkedIn, you can retarget video viewers.
Mm-hmm.
You can retarget people that have engaged with your ad, and you can do the same thing with Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, it's kind of like a 2-for-1 as well, because you're pushing all this content. That content is getting consumed. By the content getting consumed, you're actually educating and creating demand in your market. By doing that, more people will know of you, and it's just this cycle and this flywheel. The biggest thing that I hear from people in terms of the pushback of, well, I don't want to go fully ungated because I need to build a database, and that's why I need to have gated content.
Or I need to build the top of my funnel. I mean, come on, Sylvia. I need the top of funnel working. I need more people coming in the funnel. And then how do I nurture them? If I ungate it all, then I can't do anything with that.
Exactly. And to those people that, the database thing is like a big holds them back. You can still build your database with ungated content. I lead with ungated content. So very practical example, maybe I have a blog article. I push that blog article out on LinkedIn. People go to my article, they get great value out of it. Well, hey, guess what? I have an opt-in form for my newsletter.
Yep.
So after they consume that article, if they want to give me their information, I think that's going to be a much higher quality person in my database than somebody that said, hey, no, you can't get this information that you want in the first place until you give me your contact information.
100%. I mean, and I think you're also really earning their trust ultimately. And especially a lot of times when you're an early stage company, you've got no brand and you're trying to run gated content. I think a lot of times there's a huge amount of, the huge struggle today to get a whole lot of downloads. I mean, that's been on the decrease for a while now because people have built up a lack of trust with gated content because they know what happens after they fill out that form.
Yeah,
SDR
it's also a
calls.
huge pain. It's a massive pain when you're going with gated content, the lead routing that needs to be in place on the back end,
Yep.
the lead scoring, all of these additional things that you need to have in place. It creates so much more complexity.
Yep.
And, there is a place for MQLs. I wouldn't say MQLs are dead, as long as you have a scoring model in place that you're confident in.
Yep.
But in terms of the work that goes into that, so that is true, is unfortunately most companies are not there.
Let's talk about content because I think that a lot of times it's one of the biggest problems that we all have, right? We always need more content. It's more blogs, more videos, more customer testimonials, more whatever, right? But I mean, in terms of metadata, I mean, where did you guys start in the beginning, to your knowledge? Because I know you weren't there since the beginning, but as you understand more about their content roadmap and strategy, where did they start, and ultimately, like, where do you start? Does a person say, hey, should we just focus on the blog and then start distributing out that? Should we working on a podcast, and that way we got video and audio and then we can clip that up? I mean, we can't do it all, right? So we have to choose. So are there formats that you think work better or not as well? I mean, maybe talk to us a little bit about like the content production process.
Yeah, as far as how they got started and what made them choose the blog first, that's definitely a question for Mark. Not 100% sure. I think honestly, it was probably just that's what he had and he kind of ran with it, and then it grew from there. That's
Sure.
probably the honest answer. But as far as what do you choose, I would say it all goes back to who are you marketing to. So if your ICP enjoys listening to podcasts primarily, then I would start a podcast. But the way I would think about it is whether it's a podcast or a blog article or a YouTube channel, you want to think of like what is your anchor content. So that anchor content is like your primary thing. And then from there, you can repurpose off of it. So if it's a podcast, well, guess what? We're doing video and audio. Now you can repurpose that on YouTube. You can repurpose clips on LinkedIn. If it's a blog article, you can create text snippets on LinkedIn to repurpose, and you can essentially, you want to have one primary source of content, one key anchor content pillar that you have, and then from there you can redistribute it multiple ways.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, I think the important thing is not getting overwhelmed and saying, "Hey, I have to do it all at once," but then also
Yep.
making sure you're not starting at creating small little snippets of things, but creating long form content that can be redistributed. I think Justin talks about this all the time on LinkedIn. But then you do that and you get a lot more stretch out of the content. So as long as you've got kind of some overarching goals over the content, then that content can stretch for months on end. Versus, and I think that you guys have done some really smart stuff in terms of distribution, which maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the things you guys are thinking about in terms of distribution for the next quarters. But I saw you guys started to take the demand event that you guys hosted last year, and you're actually running ads to it. And you're saying, hey, here's the content. Maybe you missed the event, right? So you're not saying, hey, the event passed, we're just going to leave it on our website. You've put all the content there so anyone can access it at any given time. And then there's a whole bunch of people that weren't able to attend demand or that maybe even heard of metadata. So then you're saying, hey, great, here's a way not only for us to market demand, because I'm sure you guys are doing the event again, and then also then still get some more eyeballs on that content. So I think that that repurposing side of thinking about how do we redistribute that content is really smart. So are you guys thinking about doing anything else similar to that in the future? What does that look like just from a paid perspective?
Yeah, right now the new thing is Demand Gen U, which is the
Mm-hmm.
podcast that Mark and Jason started, and we're using that now to create a lot of content to repurpose off of.
Mm-hmm.
And with Demand specifically, that was one of the key benefits. So when we went into Demand and we finished it, Justin had already mapped out like all the different content that he's going to be able to repurpose, and we had a whole plan in place in terms of how we're going to get the max value out of that event.
Mm-hmm.
So repurposing on YouTube, LinkedIn, literally everywhere your ICP hangs out, and maximizing that content, especially if it's good content and it really solves a problem. Why wouldn't you want to make sure that you get that in front of as many people as possible that you can help?
Totally agree. Talk to me a little bit about, I think that the kind of going back to our conversation earlier where we were talking about different goals and objectives within the channel. Now, clearly you guys are running a lot of brand awareness, I assume, in terms of objectives, but a lot of people are always asking with inside the channel, what objectives should we be running inside? Let's just pick LinkedIn, for example, because I
Yep.
did a video on that. And I think this greatly depends on the strategies we talked about before, right? Are we talking about ungated? Are we talking about gated content, et cetera? But how do you think about structuring those different objectives? Because I think you said in that video too, as well, hey, try out different objectives, see which one works for you. Is it a matter of just using one specific objective, or is it a matter of really kind of tiering those objectives out and having multiple different goals, right? Because LinkedIn, for example, to pick on that one, if we have a brand awareness campaign, it's optimizing for people that ultimately are going to view and see your ad. Website conversions, people that are going to click and get to your website and convert ultimately, so on and so forth. So how do you think about like putting together the objectives for campaigns inside the channel?
If it's videos, video views all the way. It's kind of like a tried and true thing. It's going to optimize towards getting people to consume your video. But one of the big advantages too, in terms of the cost per consumption of why it's so much cheaper with ungated content, in addition to everything we talked about, is that you don't have to use conversion-based objectives. Conversion-based objectives are always the most expensive. They're going to have the highest CPMs, the most advertisers using those objectives, especially if you're going with gated content. You have to use things like lead generation forms or conversion campaigns to be able to, get those people to convert to consume the content.
Yep.
The huge advantage of ungated and just creating demand is you can use things like video views to promote your videos on LinkedIn. You can also use things like website visits. And also one that I really, really like is post engagement. I've noticed with post engagement that you can drive a lot of clicks for a fraction of the cost compared to web visits. So I think that's definitely one that people should try. So for us, it's primarily video views, post engagement, and then we're finding so much success with post engagement. We're kind of not using website visits anymore, but test for yourself and see what works best for you. And then also at times as well, this is kind of an optional one, depends on the company. You can find some really good stuff as well with brand awareness as an objective in terms of reach. Where I really like to use brand awareness more so is if you have an event and you want to just saturate an audience as much as possible. If you have a tight deadline, you can run brand awareness and just get in front of as many people within that audience on the cheap, because you have massive breaks on your CPM.
Speaking of events, do you think using posting and promoting events through paid is a good strategy? I mean, should people be promoting their events via that and trying to get conversions right out of the platform, or should they be doing kind of what you were saying before to get kind of maximum exposure, right? Where you're saying, hey, You don't necessarily need to get a registration right out of LinkedIn or Facebook, but listen, I just want people to know that this event exists and
Yep.
what it's all about. I mean, is that still something feasible that you see a lot of success with in metadata?
Well, one of the good things about different objectives is just because I'm using web visits or brand awareness or post engagement doesn't mean I can't drive conversions. You're
Mm-hmm.
still going to be driving people to your site so they can still convert. You're just getting it at a much cheaper cost than if you were using the conversion objectives. The way I like
Mm-hmm.
to do it is I like to do both. And that way I have the conversion campaigns taken care of.
Yep.
And ideally, if you can take that ad that you're using with your conversion campaigns and reuse the same thing with your awareness campaigns and you stack social proof, especially
Mm-hmm.
for events, that just maximizes it from all
I
angles.
totally agree. I think that it's about leveraging multiple different types of objectives, being very clear with what your goals are out of that channel. And I think, for everyone that's listening, I think the important thing that Silvio is saying is that, there's the capture side of what needs to be happening in LinkedIn and Facebook, but you cannot forget the creation side. Now, they had a luxury of starting out creating demand where potentially it took a little bit longer, but ignoring that for a while ultimately is going to start hurting results long term. You don't necessarily need to get a conversion out of the channel. It doesn't have to appear in LinkedIn. Ultimately, what you should be doing is, yes, monitor and understand what attributable conversions are coming out of there, whether it's view through or click through, and understand what that looks like. But really, it's go back into your CRM and HubSpot and say, or Salesforce, whatever you use, and go in and say, all right, how many inbound demo requests that are coming in from our website? Is that on the rise? Is that increasing? And then better question is, how many of those are converting to pipeline? Do we have a strong conversion rate to pipeline? Do we have strong conversion to revenue? And then ultimately tracking that through. And that's ultimately how we say, all right, are we doing the right job as a marketing team or not? Otherwise, you're just creating conversions artificially in channels and pumping up results, which ultimately is really not leading to success.
That's one of the biggest downfalls of B2B marketers with paid media is that they're making all of their decisions solely based on the information they see in the ad channels.
Yeah.
And to add insult to injury, they're also doing it based on pixel conversions, which is even worse.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. Like, you never want to just believe what the ad channels tell you, especially if you're just tracking based on the pixel. Like, the pixels are biased.
Mm-hmm.
They're not accurate. They will overcount. There's cookies going away, all these things, right? Ad blockers. It's just getting even worse with iOS 14. If the conversion was not, especially for Facebook, like if that person did not opt in to the, being tracked, Facebook cannot recognize that conversion. So
Yep.
conversion data and quality audience targeting is like the oil and gas, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
of advertising in the future.
100%, 100%. I think it's just important to realize that. And it's hard once you're in a model that isn't built like that, right? When you've got a model that you have to have a conversion out of that, and your boss said, "We need the CPA, otherwise you can't run this channel." So then that forces different types of tactics and strategies in the channel, right? And that's where I think CPA is one of these very difficult things, or cost per lead is very difficult to set and optimize for, because a lot of times you're optimizing for the wrong types of things. A cheap lead, a cheap CPA, cheap CPL isn't necessarily a good thing, right? I mean, how do you think about that? Because I mean, clearly leading indicators are good to understand. We were just talking about it before. Cost per lead, you need website traffic, you need impressions. CPM is clearly important metric to look at. But how do we ultimately make sure that we're not optimizing for the wrong types of metrics and that we're actually optimizing for downstream metrics like pipeline? Is that something that you guys think about a lot of metadata and say, hey, we really need to be changing kind of the metrics that we're looking at? Because we talked about inbound demos, pipeline, and revenue, but how do you guys think about that optimization loop and not getting too focused on leading indicators like cost per leads and things like that?
Yeah, it's important, right? So a cost per lead isn't bad if you've worked it backwards from revenue. So for
Yep.
example, if you take your average deal size and your lead to close one rate, you can take those two figures and figure out your break even cost per lead.
Yep.
That's good. It gives you an understanding of, hey, here's how much we're willing to spend on a lead. For people who are focusing on demand capture, they're doing Google search, they're doing conversation ads, those types of campaigns, it's okay to look at your cost per lead. It matters, but don't just stop there and only take that as the reason why you're going to scale certain campaigns or not. You need to look at the full funnel, right? Are
Yep.
those leads progressing into opportunities, and all those opportunities actually converting into revenue? And
Love it.
let that be your North Star in terms of what you prioritize.
Love it. Love it. I want to wrap up with just a couple more questions. One is just kind of like a tactical takeaway or a couple of takeaways. Do you think people could actually put into use right now? Maybe something that you guys have tried at Metadata that's working really well with respect to paid advertising, or even something that's maybe not worked well, where you said, hey, this actually wasn't a good campaign that we ran and we probably wouldn't do this again? Anything kind of like tactical that you guys are doing right now that people could just take away and try to implement?
Easiest campaign I tell everybody to do when they're getting started with paid media is do a retargeting campaign on Facebook, LinkedIn, all the channels that you can support it, of just retargeting anybody that left your pricing or demo page. That is like the highest intent audience possible, right? Those people are looking at your pricing page. Get in front of those individuals and try to get them to convert. That's the most cost-effective campaign you can run. And if you don't have a big audience size, it probably doesn't take a lot of budget to deploy against that.
Love it. Love it. Well, you heard it here. Thanks again for joining. How can people stay in touch with you, follow you, and stay connected?
Check me out on LinkedIn. Just go to linkedin.com, search my name, and feel free to follow. I post content pretty regularly on paid media.
Love it, man. Well, enjoyed it. Thanks again, man.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.